It amazes me, really does, how people are so quick to forget all their promises to God. So quick. And that's what happened again to Israel. After winning that wonderful battle with Deborah and Barak, they left God again in a few years. And so Israel started worshiping idols again, Baal. Their children started to intermarry with people who did not believe in the one true and living God. And in fact, Israel was getting very oppressed because God kind of gave up on them. But there was a nation next to them full of people called the Midianites. And the Midianites were coming in on Israel's land. And the Midianites were sort of like wandering people. And they just let their cattle come in and graze on the Israelite land. And they were eating, the people were eating all the Israelites' crops, taking advantage of all of their fruit, stealing things, and actually oppressing the Israelites and turning things around. So the Israelites became like slaves to them and had to provide the Midianites with food and comforts. And Israel was so oppressed. There was a young man from a large family. His name was Gideon. And he was out in his field, and he was pounding the wheat kernels off of the wheat. They call it threshing, to get the kernels off. And he was from a large family, and they were very poor Israelites, very poor. And so this is how he was helping his family. He had a lot of brothers and sisters, and he was just kind of a nondescript little teenage guy doing his thing. And while he was doing that, all of a sudden he saw a man not far off from him, and this man was sitting on a rock, and he had a staff in his hand. And he said, "Hi, Gideon." And Gideon thought, well, who on earth are you? And he said, "I'm a messenger from the Lord." And Gideon thought, what is this? What's going on? And he talked with Gideon for a while, and Gideon didn't really believe him right away, but he said, okay, if you're from the Lord, I'm going to go get something. I'm going to get some food, and when I come back with the food, if you're still here, I know that you're from the Lord. But if you're gone, I know that you're just here to bug me. So Gideon came back, and he was kind enough to give some food to the man. He thought the man was maybe destitute or a little touched or something. So he gave the food to the man. But the man took the food, and he dumped out the meat on a rock, and he dumped out the bread on a rock, and then he dumped out the broth. There goes the meal. And Gideon thought, well, what's going on here? And the man said, watch. And he took his staff, and he touched the rock, and tremendous flame came up, and it burnt up the bread and the meat to a crisp. There was nothing left but ashes floating in the air. And Gideon said, okay, now I know you are from the Lord. Nobody else could do something like that. And the man said, I want you, Gideon, I want you to lead the people into battle against the Midianites. And he thought, yeah, right. he was a very shy young teenager minding his own business. And he said, I want you to be brave, and I want you to tear down these altars to Baal that you see on your father's property around here. Even Gideon's dad, I don't know if he was taking money to come on his property to worship their altars or what, but even his dad had one on his property. And he said, I want you to destroy these altars. And Gideon said, yes, sir, I'll do that. So Gideon went and got 10 men to help him. And they started tearing down the altars to Baal. Can you imagine Israel overcoming so much evil and knowing God is with them? And now they're right back in the same stink hole, same mud hole, worshiping Baal and other gods. That people just don't make sense. And anyway, so they brought in an ox and they started tearing down the altars. And then they also were cutting trees down. So the altars were not under trees anymore. And then they took the ox, and the ox was trampling, and they were chopping and cutting up. I don't know if they were made out of stone or brass or what, but anyway, they started trampling down these altars, and they trampled them to smithereens, just to pieces, cutting them up. And so they were gone. Well, then, when the people came, he did this at midnight so nobody would know. So when the people came in the morning to worship Baal, it was all gone. The trees were cut down, their altar to Baal, their statue was gone. And they said, what on earth has happened here? And somebody said, well, it was Joash's son that did it, and his name is Gideon. And I think you need to go after Gideon and blame him. And so instead they went to Joash, the father, and said, look what your son has done here. And we want you to bring Gideon out to us because we just want to wring his neck. We want to actually kill him. And then Joash came to his senses and he said, okay, if you think that your Baal is strong enough, have him kill my son. Well, then the people thought about that and they said, well, no, our gods can't do that. And so a lot of them just disintegrated and went away. Well, then Gideon came out and he said, where'd they all go, Dad? And he says, they went away. So Gideon was again confronted by the strange man. And the Lord told Gideon that he was going to be with him. Gideon says, you know what? I want to know this for sure. He said, Lord, if I put out, he didn't go up to Joann Fabrics and get a piece of wool. He had a real piece of wool. And he said, if I put this wool out on the stone patio here, I want to know if you're with me. And in the morning, if the patio is all dry around it, but if the wool is wet, then I know you're with me. So he did that overnight. He came out in the morning. Sure enough, the patio was dry as a bone, but the wool, the square wool, was sopping wet. And the scripture says that he wrung it out. It was so full of water. He got a whole bucket of water out of the wool. But he wanted to test God again. And he said, okay, Lord, I want to know for sure, and I'm going to do this again. Only this time, I want the wool to be dry as a bone, and I want everything around it to be wet. So Gideon came out in the morning, and sure enough, it was that way. And then he knew God was with him for sure. So I'm going to leave it off there right now, but I'll continue on another one. I'll be right back. Bye-bye.